All right, welcome to another K-Niche production. It's good to have you back for the second in this series. Now, as you can see by the cover slide here, today we'll be doing the classical and scientific management theory. All right. Now, as a means of introduction, we actually need to go into a bit of the history about how management theories came into place. So, the first thing that we're going to look at is actually the rise of the classical approach, and especially who it was pioneered by, say Max Weber, Henry Fayol. But firstly, though, the classical theory really came into play around the rise of the Industrial Revolution. Now, when the Industrial Revolution came around, there was an invention of reliable steam-powered machines. Okay, there was a lot more needed in terms of the management of staff. Now, for the first time, businesses could really mass-produce goods. Okay, and we'll look at some of that soon about some of the leading people when it came to that, including Henry Ford. However, with mass produce of goods and larger factories, there became a lot of issues when it came to management. Problems arose with training employees. There was organising managerial structure, so who reported to who. You had scheduling complex manufacturing processes, especially, and dealing with worker dissatisfaction. Okay. Business owners now, they had to start to plan, organise, direct, control staff. So in response to these problems, there were many theories that came into play, and this was kind of the evolution of modern management per se, and classical management had begun. So for one thing, as I said, the two were pioneered by Max Weber and Henry Fayol. Weber especially argued that bureaucracy is the most efficient form of organisation. Now that meant that had a leader at the top and the information flowed down through there. So it had a strict hierarchical organisational structure. There was discipline was a feature of leadership. It was very much do as you're told. There was clear lines of communication and responsibility, and jobs broken down into simple tasks, okay, with division of labour and specialisation. We'll see what that means in a second. Rules and procedures were also a very important part of this. Fayol, he identified a number of management functions, okay, and at the foremost of these was planning, organising, leading, and controlling. Another pioneer of the scientific approach. So you had the classical approach before. Now you got the scientific, and it was kind of a blend of the two. But the scientific approach was pioneered by Frederick Taylor, and there was four key principles in this one. Firstly, it was to scientifically examine each part of the task to determine the most efficient method. Okay, so it was breaking it down into smaller portions and figuring out the most efficient method and how to deal with that. Selecting suitable workers and training them to use the developed work methods. Once again, I'm going to give you examples on this next slide. So cooperate with workers to guarantee they use the scientific method. So it was very much, scientific approach was very much about control by the management, and how to divide the work and responsibly, so that management is responsible for the planning, organising and controlling. It's really trying to keep, once again, all the power in the manager's hands and how to delegate that appropriately to staff for the most efficient method. The scientific approach, okay. First off, you've got Ford, all right. Now, Henry Ford, who was the owner and the first to produce, obviously, the Ford motor car, he was one of the most notable students of the classical scientific theory approach to management. Ford became an enthusiastic believer in the scientific approach, and the use of machines, especially when it came to building a business model. Ford developed his famous mechanized assembly line in 1913. Okay, so it was during the First World War, so prior to the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, and later that had a bigger effect on it. But he pretty much before Henry Ford came along, motor cars were extremely expensive. They took a long time to produce, and they were really only for the rich of the rich who were able to purchase them. Henry Ford, by using the classical scientific approach, he really revolutionized the car industry. His approach involved a car assembly. Okay, now that involved moving a chassis down an assembly line. So as you can see here, you've got your assembly lines where you have the same parts coming in over and over and over, and the same people doing the same jobs. If you refer back to our last slide, that's how we determined each part of the task, and it was the most efficient method. Broke it down, worked with the workers to make sure they're trained on their specific part of that assembly line. It went down on a conveyor belt, so that it was the use of machinery throughout all aspects, okay, as you can see here. Now, small teams of workers would move the car, fitting various components along the production line. So it wasn't a team of workers just doing the same car from bottom to top. It was passing it along and then giving it to the next specialised team. So you do your specialised bit, and then you become very efficient at that. The end result was to reduce the hours spent on the assembly of car, and it was 700 on average 728 hours to build a car before this production line. On average, it was now 1.5 hours after Henry Ford did that. So he made a massive difference to the price of cars, the availability of cars, and really revolutionised the world with his scientific classical approach. McDonald's is another very famous one. Okay, from it. What they like to do especially is hire very young people to start with that don't have any, I guess, developed bad habits in the workplace. And McDonald's actually then works to train them how they want them to work. Okay, and they instill them with the skills that suit their business model. So, for instance, a Big Mac is produced according to a set number of steps. So you have to go to make a Big Mac or a cheeseburger, whatever it might be, you have to go through that certain amount of steps to get that. You don't just construct it from the bottom any which way. It is a set method so that anyone can step in at any point and take over. There's fixed amount on each burger, so there's your fixed amount of lettuce, cheese, whatever it might be. I worked at McDonald's for a lot of years, and you actually used to have to do tests on how much of a product was on a different burger. So I remember the cheeseburger had, I think it was 15 mils of ketchup, 5 mils of mayo, a sprinkle of onion, 1 bit of cheese, and then your patty was also on there as well, and 2 pickles. Okay. When dealing with its employees, they emphasise the human relations aspect. This is where McDonald's values slightly differ. One manager, they realised that without committed employees and motivated employees, that their business model isn't going to work, because it's very refined, and they need people to be involved with it and wanting to be in there. And one way they do this is through promotion. Through such things as crew trainers, so staff members that are in charge, who then report to managers, who then report to a whole different level. So both Ford and McDonald's were extremely good at instituting the scientific approach to suit their business model. So you can see here exactly what we're talking about, almost with an assembly line. You've got your set amount. These here are actually, they're called source guns, and what they do is they dispense from this gun the exact same amount for every burger, okay? And then you have someone here that's wrapping the burgers, putting the sauce on, and then they'll shoot that down to the front of house staff, who will actually then give that to the customer. So as previously mentioned, the classical scientific theorists considered 3 main functions. They were planning, organising, and controlling. When it comes to planning, it's all about setting goals for the business and really working out the best ways of achieving those goals in a changing environment. So as we've looked at, goal setting for a manager and for a business is extremely important. Now, the best way to achieve goals is through strategy or strategic planning. Now, this is kind of broken into 3 time frames, if you like. Short term is more your operational planning, okay, day to day, how you go about things. Tactical is medium term planning, and strategic is more long term planning. Okay, so strategic planning would involve more about your long term goals for the business and how you want to get there. So if you're planning on diversifying or some form of integration, that would be how you actually get to that. Get to that place within the business. The organising is about designing a framework for the business, about how it operates really day to day. When managers are involved in the organising, there's things like what tasks need to be done, okay? Which workers will do these tasks, how will workers do the tasks, and who will supervise them. This will go into more detail as we go along, but the organising is pretty much the day-to-day of how managers are going to work to achieve those plans that we looked at in the previous slide. And now controlling, and that's really working out ways to measure what was happening in the business and then compare it to what the managers had planned to happen, okay? They need to know whether or not their plans were working. So controlling is about reassessing, figuring out if they're going about things the right way. And really this 3-stage process is about being realistic about where the business is and how they're achieving their goals and the role that managers play in trying to get their staff to really achieve this. Now, planning, organising, controlling, there's a few examples here. Now, the first one is, first one's Chrysler, and we're going to look at Dell, but most strategic plans, they're monitored quarterly. Okay, businesses make strategic plans that are monitored in order to figure out whether the plan is being adhered to. Due to the number of competitors and really the fact that it's now global economy, most businesses or industries are competing. They need to develop and adapt a strategic plan in order to keep their business competitive, okay, in order to really keep their competitive advantage. Chrysler, I love a little sound effect. Brom, brom. All right, sweet doughies there. Now, Lee Iacocca, who you see here, is famous. He saved Chrysler from extinction and still remains one of the most strategic planners for competitively. He restructured Chrysler from top to bottom. He really changed their business model, the way they were managed, and what he wanted to try and achieve from the business. So he's a very famous example of it. Then you can look at Dell as well, which we'll look at in a second. But sustaining a strategic plan and continuously trying to improve your operations is essential for sustaining profit, okay? And that's what you're ultimately trying to do as a business. Companies that stay ahead of their competitors, they often receive open communication from all members of the organisation, and that's called 360-degree feedback. And it's a continuous team effort to improve productivity and operations. So, managers really try and get information from the ground per se about how their management is working, how their operations are working, and get feedback continuously from their employees. There's often times where a plan is developed and found to be unsuccessful, and adapting to this change and staying on top of it, by such things as completing a SWOT analysis, so the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's desirable to obtain a firm understanding of this market through these kind of processes. The production process, the competitors, and the opportunities that may exist for future consideration. Now, to put it in its most basic, a strategic plan is a roadmap to success. Okay, and those that keep planning their route regularly are more likely to keep their competitive advantage. So that's why businesses really need to adapt to this. I'll explain about Dell actually in the next video. So this is Kanish signing out for part 1 of scientific and classical management, and tune into part 2, which will be a short video.